Welcome back to the SampanViking on China channel. In the last video, I discussed the new battle lines drawn in the new Cold War Superpower Confrontation, and these lines were strictly the military variety in all the various theatres, starting in the previous video before that, dealing specifically with Taiwan, expanding out to the greater lines in the power lines in the Asia-Pacific region, in the Black Sea, Baltic, Mediterranean, and North Atlantic Arctic Oceans, etc. But this video, I'm going to take that a little bit further and expand that into the social and cultural and political battle lines, which in many ways I think are as important, if not more important, than simply the military ones. And I would add to that that actually social and cultural are maybe more important again than simply the political. Because whilst you have a very obvious divide between the West and the East, with sort of liberal democracy and communism, effectively, in China, I would suggest that with the social and cultural underpinnings, if you simply swapped over the two versions of the political systems, you actually would still end up with a situation which wasn't vastly different from the ones you already have. So it is the underpinnings of society that I think are the biggest differences that are coming to play, but they do have a strong political dimension attached to them. And although the political system is simply a vehicle through which they are exercised. The biggest difference, I think, really, in how the two sides engage is how the two systems operate. And in the West, it is largely a system driven both on the right and on the left by lawyers and lobbyists and the various causes and the interests that they represent, special interests, and their advocates on both sides. On the right, this is, of course, the billionaires, big capital, big business, which is, to all effects and purposes, dominant in the West. The interests of big capital, the interests of big business are regarded as paramount, and very little is actually done to get in their way. And as we have seen just this week in the UK Parliament, if something does come along that gets in the way, a government is more than happy to try and retrospectively change the law to make sure it doesn't. In this case, it didn't work, but there we are. That was high profile. What other things less noticed go through that we only hear about in the small print of the back pages of the press, if mentioned at all. On the left, it's a bit more prosaic. I think Putin has described the causes of the left very succinctly over the last week or so, calling them increasingly absurd. And I think it is very, very difficult to actually regard many of the causes currently being espoused by the left as anything other than what started off as a perfectly understandable, natural, and needed cause for equality and fairness has degenerated into some kind of weird freak show. And I do actually wonder whether or not the left has been infiltrated by the influence of capital to go this way, because it seems that the only result of this, of going in this direction, is to put forward a series of core celebs, special interests, etc., that really alienate what I like to regard as the sane centre of any society, those normal people who simply want to make a living, improve life for their families, and aren't particularly interested in activism one way or the other. Um, Simply because by doing this, it simply makes the right the least bad decision of the two, which is why we seem to get perpetually right of centre governments in most parts of the West. That is the situation in the West, and what does it come up against? Well, it comes up against a Chinese society that is very, very different. Liberal democracy, the description we have in the West, it is often described as a rights-based society and a rule of law. Well, China has human rights. China has the rule of law. They may be different. They may operate in different ways, but they're no less valid simply because they are unfamiliar from us here in the West, as indeed the Western values and techniques are unfamiliar to those in the East. But there is, I believe, one major difference between the two sides, and where in the West it highlights rights above all else. In the East, it is rights and responsibilities. And I commend this, to be honest. I think this is the very kind of measure, the very kind of attitude that does defend the interests of the sane centre from the excesses of both extreme capital and billionaires on the right, and absurdities on the left. It keeps everything in check. We saw that with Mr. May and Alibaba, where he was slapped down for speaking out of turn, and he had an IPO pulled. Other social media companies have been told to clean up their act. Fairly addictive games are now being restricted in the amount of time that children can go on and use them. They're also controlling things like homework, and bearing in mind there's a lot of private tutoring schools. This is something that's going to again cut down on what they can do, as indeed they've also cut down on the ability of organizations campaigning causes on companies to use children to promote those causes and products to adults. And again, the example of Greta Thunberg here in the West springs very much to mind, of a young person being used quite cynically by much older adults to advance a cause that they themselves are not telegenetic enough in order to front. So that is, I think, how the battle lines are drawn, and and it is a conflict, and we know it is simply by the vitriol that the West pours upon the Chinese standards, despite the fact that really the Chinese system delivers the goods for the ordinary people, because the Western system doesn't really value the ordinary people. It values the interests of those that call the shots and nothing else, and this is very evident. We don't really have an entrepreneurial structure. We have a system based on essentially rent seeking. It is ownership of assets. It is the seeking of rent. They get the tax breaks, and everybody else, genuine entrepreneurs, get nothing like. Yeah, and the bits that you get, though, after time, they don't actually need them, so it doesn't really do them very much good. Where does all this lead? Well, it is a battle of wills. And I think, in the most part, it is a desperate attempt by the Western leadership to make sure that the sane centre in the West doesn't find out that there is a system that actually works better for their interest than the ones that they are being offered in the West itself. This is a very significant battle line, and one which is going to be very, very hard work to do, because most of the propaganda that's been put out by the West over the last 10, 20, 30 years has been to immediately associate what goes on in China with darkness, oppression, and no freedoms and no rights, and quite an appalling level of police oppression, when in fact it couldn't be further from the truth. And in many respects, the sense of respect and responsibility that is exercised by people in China ensures that many people do in fact enjoy a much better quality of everyday life. And I think the reason for this is very, very simple. When you simply extol the virtue of freedoms above all else, it comes down to your ability to enforce your right to enjoy those freedoms. And this ultimately means that the rights of the very wealthy and the very powerful are able to exert themselves to the maximum, and everybody else has to put up with the consequences. So it is simply a nice bit of spin to ensure that privilege and wealth is paramount at the expense of everybody else. In China, these excesses are curbed for the benefit of the vast majority of ordinary working people. And that, I believe, is exactly how it should be. So, in addition to everything else, we also have these fronts as well. And how these play out is going to be very, very interesting. As there are many, many different domains of warfare in the military sphere, we are now seeing many, many domains of warfare in the social and cultural sphere as well. Hell, I might even be a foot soldier in this by making these videos. And this is how it's played out. Lots of people making lots of comments, trying to get attention, trying to get people to listen to them, listen to what they have to say, if not necessarily to convince them that any particular source is the font of all wisdom, but at least to spark the curiosity to make inquiries and searches of their own, to actually delve through the automatic message that puts out and which just conditions your brain to think in a certain way, and to shake off that conditioning and to look for a deeper reality and understand a more fundamental truth. Well, thank you very much for listening. A little bit more philosophical perhaps today than most videos, but it's an important part of the overall discussion. If you enjoyed this video, please like. If you have not yet subscribed, please do. It's free and it helps this channel to grow. If you'd like to be notified of future videos, please ring the bell. You will find out. If you'd like others to listen to what I have to say, hit the share button. And if you would like to leave a comment or ask a question, please put it in the comment sections and I will reply where appropriate to the best of my ability as soon as I can. I look forward to you joining me in the next video. Thank you very much.